maybe to open the conversation, Pierre, your group has just come out with a bold new mission. Obviously, for those who aren't so familiar with media, one of the big challenges in the media industry is you always have this balance of we need to make money, but we also have a social mission to deliver. Your mission takes a very, I would say, active stance in terms of tackling environmental issues and so forth. Can you please tell us, what made you decide to do that, and sort of what is the essence of that change?
Well, we decided that we could not just be observers of the world changing. We could not just tell the story of a world that changes sometimes in bad directions, that we wanted to be also actors, players, committed observers, if you want. So we decided that we wanted to change our own group, and we launched a full-force operation within the group to suppress all the things that contribute to destroying our planet. So we changed a lot of that. And I proposed this actually to all the staff and the 1,400 people of the group, and they really warmly accepted it. They wanted to be part of the solution, and not only, if I may say, describing what happens in the world. So that was the first step. And the newspapers are very different. Les Echos is a very economic newspaper, obviously covering the economic world. And Le Parisien is much more of a generalist, popular newspaper. But in all of their coverages, and even for that salon, actually, for Change Now, they brought their perspective on this changing world with the idea of bringing up solutions. We want to be in a solution-driven journalism. So we produce elements of things that can change the world, things that can bring a good solution to the environment. And that's why finally we decided to announce 2 days ago actually our reason why, notre raison d'être, which is to observe, decrypt, bring information, share together for a responsible society. And this is obviously pretty broad, but in a way, I think it's important for us to say we want to make this happen in the group, and we want to be with you, with our audiences, 25 million people every month coming to our sites and newspapers. We want to give you means and ways to be players, to be actors. And also we want to help you mobilize your energies for that direction.
Great. And so, Jeremy, the Washington Post, its motto, democracy dies in darkness, very powerful, very strong. Obviously the balance of money and mission. Money, it's always important to sort of create something that can be sustainable, but what is the view from the other side of the Atlantic, if I may say so?
I really believe that at the Washington Post, our ability to hold the powerful accountable is directly rooted in our ability to reach readers and offer them a product worth paying for. So I don't think those two things move separately. We wouldn't want to rely on outside funding to support the enterprise that we have exclusively, whether it was grants or state funding, because it would make it more difficult for us to investigate the powerful people who are enabling us. And so for us, I think that direct relationship, saying we're going to create a product that is worthy of subscription, whether it was a print product historically or now a digital product, is very important. We don't necessarily want to cater to the whims of our readers any more than we want to cater to outside interests. But if we create journalism that holds important people accountable and is compelling and interesting, then people are in turn paying. That's the kind of relationship we want to have between the mission, making sure that democracy does not die in darkness, and the economics.
Shall I take it, from there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so now that you've shared about this, it's super interesting maybe for the audience to know, if we get back to the fake news, what is the main challenge? Has it really, and how is it impacting journalism in both of your media?
Maybe I'll try to give a few elements, and I'm not a journalist, first of all, for full disclosure, so I'm not writing papers. I've been, as you mentioned, the head of Agence France Presse, which had 1,500 journalists, so a large newsroom and people all over the world, and Les Echos, Le Parisien has about 600. So my perspective on this is really, we have not invented the fake news. If you look at Iliad and Odyssey, there's a lot of fake news in that. So it goes, to 3,000 years ago, maybe. People were already telling stories in order to bring a message out, and rewriting history, rewriting things that had happened. So this is something that has been going on for a while, probably. But two things have changed dramatically. One thing is the intention to be storytelling in the news, and the intention of the people we cover to storytell us, to try to sell us something which is not true. And it goes very far. It goes even to major players that have been elected democratically, probably, but that sometimes tell you that this is alternative truth, which is, a new category that even the Greeks 3,000 years ago had not invented. So this has changed. People want to storytell us. And the second thing is the massification. The massification that Frédéric Fillou was describing. Facebook has become, in a way, the agora of the world. But in this agora, no one makes the law exist. It's an agora on which people can come and tell things which are not true and inject them into the massive dissemination force that Facebook is, and let this untrue thing, this untrue version of the world, ramify and be distributed around the world. So this is a dramatic change. It's more massive, and there is more intention to deceive.
I think the other thing that has changed so dramatically in terms of disinformation is what the role of the press plays. So when I think about the challenges of disinformation for the Post, I think of a variety of things. I think about the fact that our offering, we have about 850 reporters, editors, and other journalists in the newsroom, that on external social platforms, the news we create looks almost parallel to the news that's created deliberately as disinformation. So one is this sort of question of identity and question of brand. Now that exists on two levels. One is the idea that obviously there is confusion in the marketplace, but the other is that part of the reason that more and more people are willing to pay directly for news is because of this disinformation in the marketplace. So it is almost to a strong news brand's benefit to have disinformation in the marketplace because it makes people realize the value of information. That is not great for society. So the second challenge is, how do we come to agree on a core set of facts? That when our reporters cover an event and reporters from another organization that does not share our values cover the event, how do we make sure that people understand what actually happened? Not the spin, not what political figures wish had happened, but what actually happened. So there is a real conversation that has to be had about how do we as a society agree on what are actual facts and what's analysis. And then the third thing that's really important to us as a newsroom is the investment that we make in fact-checking. And Val alluded to this, but the Post is a member of an international fact-checking organization. We have about a dozen staffers who work on fact-checking for our own platforms, fact-checking for YouTube, and we're very committed to how we try to thwart disinformation. That said, it is not our role and our job to fact-check Facebook for Facebook. And I do think that it's really important that news organizations not be scorekeepers in disinformation. It's one thing for us to publish what we think is true and not true, whether it's said by a politician or another news organization, and entirely another to say Facebook should be allowed to publish whatever it wants as long as the Washington Post approves it. And that's a relationship that we have not been comfortable having to this point.
And do you think that media should have a proactive role in policy, like a leading role in policy issues around this?
I don't think it's our job to tell politicians or society at large how it should structure and organize itself. I do think it's our job to cover the impacts of those decisions. And so I think as much as we can at the Post, what we're trying to do is explain. We're not trying to get involved. We're certainly not trying to take sides. What we are trying to do is show the world what we see, what we hear, and what we understand, and hope that they, in turn, the politicians and the voters, make decisions accordingly.
I would probably not completely agree with you on this one, and I think we could agree not to agree. But I think we have media groups that have a role to play, and sometimes we want to expand an explanation of the world. We want to send it out. And for instance, when it comes to the mega platforms that I call the supranationals today, not only multinationals, but above the governments, above the states, sometimes not fully abiding to the laws of all of those governments that have been democratically voted, I think we need to push certain themes forward. For instance, the theme of regulation. If we had to wait for governments to decide that it's important to regulate those platforms, maybe we would wait for a long time. So we want to stress that because we are heavily regulated in many ways, and it's all right. We should be, and the journalists have an ethic and ethic code, and we abide to a lot of laws, and we pay taxes, and we do a lot of things that are considered part of the democratic construction and have been for 2,000 years again, and they sometimes don't fully. To be very simple, they don't fully abide, they don't fully respect all of that. They will, and I think they're learning now that with great powers come great responsibilities. I think it's a quote from Spider-Man, yeah. But why not? Why not quote Spider-Man today? And so they are young giants, sometimes adolescents now, almost adults, but not fully, and they need to play that role. And we are old organizations. We should not have all the downsides of being old. Being old means that we have gone through, Les Echos is 111 years of history, so we've gone through a lot, and the Washington Post obviously has gone and has produced, things that have changed the world, literally, truth that has changed the world. And so we need to say, from our point of view, from our perspective, you should abide to this, you should be regulated more than you are, in order for us to play on a level playing field, and also in order for us not to be completely deprived of our resources. Otherwise, we will have a hard time producing those islands of truth that need to be still injected in an ocean of fake things and commons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The thing that I think is really important for us at the Post is that we are constantly conscious of the fact that no one elected us. And so I think when I agree completely that we need to pick topics that have societal import, that we need to be very clever and smart about the limited resources we have, what we choose to investigate. But I'm very leery about stepping into policy. So a good example of where I think we're most effective is the Post over the last 4 years has done tremendous reporting and deep investigative work, filing FOIA requests, meaning Freedom of Information Acts, where we tried to get at data that was not publicly available, all about the spread of opioids, synthetic and other, throughout the United States and around the world. What's the impact of this work? The impact of this work is that policymakers have made changes about what is possible for people to do in terms of subscriptions. They're holding doctors and pharmacies and drug companies to much higher standards. And the editorial board, the opinion part of the Post, advocated for some of those changes. But the newsroom could talk to all of the actors in that conversation, the drug companies, the policymakers, the doctors, and the people who are being prescribed opioids, and have a fair and frank conversation because we as a newsroom had not taken a side. And so I think you have to be very careful about both your objectivity and your story selection. In the stories and the topics that you tackle, that can be where you determine what impact you want to have. But I feel most comfortable when our newsroom is making sure that it's the policymakers who get to change what the regulations are, and it's the newsroom who discovers and disseminates the important information of the day.
I had maybe a last question before giving you back the mic, but it's about paywalls, because I know that there's been a lot of very positive evolution in those terms. Could you share what the experience has been for you?
So maybe not overall on paywalls. I think it's a long story of paywalls, trying to put certain contents behind the wall in order to foster transformation of people that just visit you or woo you to people to marry you, people that will really enter into a contractual relationship with you. So you have done this in a tremendous way for years, and some of your colleagues in the United States do. And in our group, we're trying to develop this, and Les Echos is pretty far advanced, and Parisien is following up. What I feel is that sometimes also we should really put forward contents that are behind the wall, and we should decide that no, they're not going to be behind the wall. For instance, we opened about a week ago, I think, a new tab in our Les Echos website, which is dedicated to planet. And so we felt this should not be protected by the paywall. This is for us so important, and also it is helped by a partner that helps us fund this coverage, like The Guardian does, or like many others do, that we should put it in an open access in order for people to be able to read it. So it's a tab, Les Écoplanètes. There's a lot of information, a great coverage, and this should not be protected. Again, it's a choice. We could also feel that it is so great that it should be paid for and protected, but this is so important that it should be brought forward. So this is one of the strategies. But apart from that, yes, obviously we want certain articles that you guys call the diamonds, I think, articles that are so strong that you put them in light, and also you make them tools for recruitment. People will want to know the rest of the story, and absolutely, this is what we should do. We are fighting and competing with people that are platforms, and other platforms like Netflix or the others. They invest billions of dollars into contents. We invest hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars into contents. The subscriptions are paid the same price, like 10 euros or $9.99 for everybody. So we feel that we should protect our content and make it something that converts people into subscribers.
Mm-hmm. I think for a very long time, especially in the US, which was very much for news a home delivery market, people had a clear sense of what they paid for. If you got a printed newspaper, yes, you got news, but effectively you were paying for someone to bring it to you. And I think the transition to digital has been challenging because of that, because it doesn't feel as much of a service for you to come to our website or come to our native app as it did for us to bring something to you. I do think we have tried very hard to make clear that the journalism we create has value, and that while we believe strongly in advertising, we also want to have that value funded directly by readers. And so if we can create compelling and powerful, captivating journalism, that asking readers to pay for that directly is a good thing. There are certainly situations where we open up the paywall or the registration wall around elections, around natural disasters, and moments where we feel like there's a societal benefit not to limit access to news. But when we can, if we can have our journalism funded by the people who care about it enough to pay, I think we're in a much better place, not just economically, but also in the mandate that we have to ask people difficult questions. Because if they know that there are millions of readers who are willing to pay and are likely to look, then suddenly they might be willing to answer a question that otherwise they might not need to.
So if I can jump into this a little bit, I really like the comparison that you took, because in fact, everyone thinks about a paywall as a new model. In fact, it's the oldest model that newspapers have had. We just had a brief interlude when we decided to share everything for free on the internet. But now we need to reconvert readers back to actually paying for content. Obviously opening up content during times when it's important for the social mission, that's sort of clear that it's great that it's being done. But I see kind of another danger here, which is in order to get people to subscribe, it's one of the most powerful tools is a sort of emotional attachment or tug that bring them onto your side. That's something, our societies are already quite polarized. I think in the US particularly so, but in Europe as well, it's a growing phenomenon. Is there not a risk that paywalls essentially become something that, yes, we use this polarization to get people into our camp, but we end up in separate camps?
I think polarization is an issue that we take very seriously, and we strive to be middle of the road in looking at a lot of the tracking that the US does. The Pew Research study and others suggest that we are perceived to be fairly middle of the road. We'd like to be even more middle of the road in our perception. But I don't even know that polarization is the main thing that I'm worried about. What I worry about is a haves and have-not society around information. What we want to make sure we don't do is essentially say there is low quality information or disinformation available to anyone, and high quality information that is only available if you're willing to pay. And certainly in the United States, that's a bit of a risk. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post are some of the most successful paywalled US-based news publications, and also in general, some of the largest staffs who have the ability to do the most compelling research and reporting. And so I think there are two risks. There's a risk that your subscription just fulfills your existing prior beliefs, and there's a risk that some people can't afford or won't afford to pay for high quality news. And I think we have to be careful about both of those things. At the same time, I think there is also a risk in being a publication that doesn't have reader revenue, because then effectively you're even more beholden to advertisers.
You lose the connection. Pierre, you mentioned the issue of platforms, right? So media essentially lost out to them in the previous digital transformation. Now it looks like we're on the cusp of a new one. To take one of the big sort of rising formats, which is podcasts and sort of audio delivery, this has been a boom. Many media have launched podcasts that have been both editorially and commercially incredibly successful. Right now we see a market that is again consolidating, and again the risk of platforms coming back. How do you see the future, the next couple of years for media? Will they manage to get their groove back and or will they continue to be beholden to platforms, including via such new formats as podcasts?
Well, we have to develop all the ways we can entertain our audiences, enter in relationship with the audience also. Our audiences are the same audiences that will watch Netflix or all the others, Disney, HBO, you name it. So there is a limited amount of time that they have for us actually. So we have to rely on good journalism to begin with. It obviously, get it first, but first get it right. Send out good stories out. Have people on the ground producing good journalism. We have to stick to our forces and values. Otherwise, we would be, neutral or indifferent to our readers. This is one thing, and then we have to use all the technical means to address this audience, to reach out to the audience. We felt, in the last 10 years in France, for instance, the press has lost 50% of its advertising revenues. 50%. Radio and TV were pretty much stable, so all of those revenues went to the new players, the platforms. Yeah. Okay, that's the situation, and they have conquered this, based on their strengths and qualities probably, and advantages with regard to us. So now we're trying to not just fight back, but trying to defend what we have and trying to find out whether podcasts, for instance, would be a good way for people to spend time with us, spend time with our newsrooms, because in the ones we do with Les Échos Parisiens, the people from the newsroom do the podcast, the same ones that write. In the two podcasts, you have the person who has written an article, for instance, on Gozn, Carlos Gozn, and he will do a podcast. So he has done the inquiry, he has written, and then he does a podcast. So it's a way for our readers and listeners in that perspective to be with us, to experience the brand, and to be with us in many other ways.
Okay. Fantastic. I think we're running a bit short on time, but it was a really great conversation. Thank you so much for coming here. Let's give it up for the give it up for the comments. I'd like to thank everyone today and the speakers and the audience as well. The media battle for the transformation, for the challenge, to address the challenges of fake news and so forth is not quite finished, but we have tech solutions, we have market solutions, and we have media who are leading the transformation to change the media landscape now. So thank you very much.